Hello and welcome to another episode of the CG Garage. This is episode number 430, featuring Sean Faden, VFX Supervisor, a fantastic person who I met in my very first gig at Digital Domain on Day After Tomorrow. And it was through seeing people like Sean and through people like David Prescott that I sort of got introduced to the fact that there is a whole other world of tools, especially something called Houdini, which I'd never heard of until I actually went to that to DD at that time. And he's a really fantastic person. He has an amazing career. He actually started off doing things in the model shop, believe it or not, at DD, working on the model Titanic, and sort of grew from there and did some really great work. He later worked at Asylum and did some amazing work there as well. And we talked a lot about what that was like working in commercials and actually talking about flame artists in general and how they have sort of this superpower in that area, especially during that time, which I think was really cool. He later sort of moved on to become a studio side visual effects supervisor and did some incredible work in there, including being the VFX supervisor for Mulan, which earned him an Oscar nomination. So really cool stuff that he's done, and really happy to have him on. Super nice guy, super down to earth, and really, really fun. So thank you, Sean, for joining. Okay, we don't really have any product or new product announcements. I just want to give you guys an update. Again, that V-Ray 6 Update 1 for Cinema 4D and for Maya has been released as of several weeks ago. There's some incredible new features, and you should definitely go check those out. If you'd like to see what they are, just go to chaos.com and check out the product pages, and then we'll give you all the updates on what this Update 1 is. A really cool product and definitely worth checking out. We don't really have any events just yet. Oh, yes, sorry, we do. There's the Next Build Conference and Next Dev Conference that's happening June 19th and 20th in London. So go check that out. And you can find all of our events at chaos.com/events. If you want to know more about the podcast, of course, you can just go to our podcast page, which is chaos.com/CG Garage. We also have a Facebook page in case you want to do that, which is facebook.com/CG Garage Podcast. And if you want to watch any of these shows or any of these episodes, we put them up on our YouTube, which is youtube.com/chaosgrouptv. And they're always fun to watch as well. A lot more people are watching them on YouTube these days, and definitely worth it. So go check it out over there. And of course, if you have any ideas of podcasts, we've been getting some really great ones recently, and more of them are coming in. So happy to hear your suggestions or even just your feedback in general. We'd love to hear that as well. Our email is labs@chaos.com. All right. But for now, please enjoy episode number 430 with Sean Faden.
Welcome to another CG Garage where the Chaos Group talks. You'll know it's over when the last bucket drops. We're gonna fire off rays in high dynamic range. We know that ambient occlusion is passé. Global illumination won't lead you astray. And while image-based lighting is really swell, you need to make sure everything has Fresnel.
I've done so many of these podcasts, but a lot of them almost always start like you and I worked at DD together. That's how a lot of stories start. And Day After Tomorrow seems to be a starting point of a lot of the conversation as well. And that, I think, was the first time that we worked together, right? That was on Day After Tomorrow.
It was, yeah. So I was, it's like a touchstone for a lot of us in the business, I think.
Yeah.
We're all kind of like, because a lot of us were have been working for a while and then kind of like hit that movie, which was like, super difficult from a creative and technical standpoint. And sort of thankfully, a lot of us had some experience to be able to actually meet that project head on and figure out how to actually do it. But I did meet a lot of good friends on that show, and we always joke about that we were all kind of in the trenches together on that thing, and so when I talked to, Brian Grill, or I talked to Andy Weisler, or any of the supervisor, or Matthew Butler,
Prescott,
Todd Israelite, Julian Levy, Eric Bruno, like it was just like that camaraderie that kind of was born out of the difficulties that we had of actually getting through that show. It sort of stays with you for a lifetime, I think, and 20 years ago. But
Yeah, it was. It was
that was actually
20.
that was my last show at DD. You know, that was
That's
and
right.
you remember we finished the show, we delivered the show, and I think the same day my first kid, my daughter Joelle, was born, and it was like my last day at Digital Domain because I was like, okay, so it was like kid finishing this crazy 2-year project, and then knowing that I was like leaving all my friends and this sort of comfort nest of DD behind. It was my emotions were kind of all over the place, you know.
Yeah,
But yeah,
I can imagine.
but how long were you at DD, Chris?
I stayed through, and then I went to iRobot after that, and then I did Stealth, and then I went to Sony to work on Ghost Rider.
Okay, so you were there till like 06 or something.
I left there in 05, I think 05, and then I went back for Tron, so that was after that. Yeah. And that you and I we met again briefly at Method for a few months before I left to go back to DD. It's interesting.
Yes.
But listen, I want to get into a little bit about your background. Obviously, I think it's really interesting. First of all, it was you and I think Prescott who sort of like started realizing, it was like, there's another program called Houdini. And I I thought it was only Maya, but there's this other thing called Houdini. Houdini does these crazy things in Houdini. And I was really, really fascinated by it. And that's what I started to learn more about, like cool effects and clouds and voxel B at the time and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But what got you started? What got you into visual effects? Like, how did you have a passion for movies? Where did it all start for you?
Always loved the movies. Probably, you know, I like Star Wars like everybody, you know, of my generation, but I think it was actually Raiders of the Lost Ark in 1981.
Yeah.
Walking home, I'd seen it with my older brother and my older cousin. So my brother Ryan and my cousin Howard are like, we're walking. So they're like 13, 10, and I was 8 or something. So the three of us are walking home like two hours home from the theater that we had walked to, and just talking about the movie and talking about every aspect of it. And it was just like, and that was sort of what, and I had watched a few of the sort of behind the scenes things of like how they did stop motion and Star Wars and all that I think was starting to kind of congeal in my head of like, well, this is cool. I mean, as a little kid, I wasn't saying, okay, I want to do this as a career, but there was that. And I think probably Terminator in 84 was the same three of us walking home one night and just like the amazing kind of storytelling that could be done with visual effects was what really kind of got me, was the fact that like you could really expand a story, you know, like, okay, great stories are out there, but if you can fool the audience or do just enough to kind of suspend disbelief, that's sort of the goal. And, you know, you have something like Raiders is like, you've got ghosts flying around and, you know, energy flying out of the Ark of the Covenant. I mean, we as a kid, even you knew that wasn't real, but it's like, it was done so well for the time that you're watching it and you are transfixed and you are transported away to this other sort of world that where all this is possible. And, so I think that was always sort of embedded in the back of my head. I want to do something with movies, but then of course reality sets in and you do, you know, you do lots of math and you do lots of engineering. Like I ended up going to engineering school because I thought I was going to, I don't know. I think at some point I must have forgotten that I really want to do movies because I was somehow like thought, well, I got to just get in line and do what everybody who's good at science is going to do, which is like, I don't know, go and be an engineer. So I went to school for that, graduated with a mechanical engineering degree at UCLA and realized kind of in my senior year that I didn't really want to be an engineer. I just kind of felt like I was already kind of felt like I was a bit dying inside just from some of the stuff we were doing. And I was like, I don't know if I could now go out and do this for the rest of my life. So I did a 1-year master's program at UCLA that let me sort of basically postpone making that decision. And in that time, I was able to take a small business management class. And one of the groups of students, not my group, but another group, was actually consulting Digital Domain, like because they were a local small business. And at the end of the quarter, they did a whole presentation about DD and how cool it was. And it was like, they showed like a whole sizzle reel. And I remember one of the commercials was like the Budweiser Clydesdales, like kicking the football or something like that. And I was like, not that I'm a huge fan of Budweiser, but I was just like the stylings and what they were able to do. I think probably Apollo 13 was on the reel as well. And,
right.
And I talked to Steve Fredericks, who was the CFO, and he was the one who was there giving like the speech. And I said, do you guys hire creative engineer types at Digital Domain? He said, are you kidding me? That is our ideal candidate. Like, cause there was no schools back then really.
Right.
So I got a number for Les Ecker, who was in the model shop, and I reached out to him. And while I waited for an opportunity to do AutoCAD based miniature design, which is what I ended up doing my first job at DD. Mm-hmm. I waited for that job. And while I waited, I was carrying dead bugs around for Starship Troopers. So I worked on for like 6 weeks on set with main unit. And actually that was another place where I really I think it was becoming more and more clear that like there's a future for me in this world that will make me very happy, because it's watching Paul Verhoeven work, and I was also watching Phil Tippett work, and I got to even puppeteer some bug legs that Phil Tippett's telling me what to do. So it was just like a dream come true, Wow. But that's kind of how it all happened. It's super weird and random, but that's how I ended up at DD.
Wow, and that was obviously that was the first place. But you were working in a model shop when it was around then, right?
Exactly, yeah. So I was in the model shop for the first probably 3 months. I did miniatures on Fifth Element and Titanic.
Oh, those are beautiful miniatures.
Dante's Peak. Yeah, I mean, I didn't do a lot, but I did a lot of work on the Floss in Paradise, the blue, large cruise ship. Like I cut most of those windows on that thing. So it was like I go into my little office was like in the back corner where with the machine, and so it was like loud and whatever. But I would go from my office into the model shop and talk to the model makers, and they say, oh, we need some windows in this that kind of wrap around this contour or whatever. So I'd take some wax paper and I would just sort of get a rubbing or draw, roughly the shape. And then I try to match that and cut test pieces and just make sure, because there was no way to scan it. I just had to sort of trial and error it. And I would just print out little pieces, test it with paper, and then figure, okay, this is a good fit. And then I could sort of subdivide it and make windows based on whatever design, they were going for. So
interesting.
That was cool. But then I worked on Titanic as well. And I did like I think I scored all the planking for the miniature flooring. So like, the end shot where you travel over the floor, that's a miniature. It's
right.
Separate miniature, but so all that that was all balsa wood sheets that were sort of cut and stained to be
scored. Yeah.
And also the best thing the coolest thing I think I did was on Titanic, the windows for the ballroom. Those windows, I had to sort of score all the little panes of glass. They're about probably this big, and I would give those to the model makers, and they would smash them and test them and go, oh, they didn't pop out well enough. Okay, score them, and they do random scoring and all that kind of stuff, and find the best balance so the windows would sort of explode out when they got compressed.
Wow.
Yeah. But that didn't last. I mean, that was 3 months. And then Les Ecker, bless his heart, was like, model shop's kind of slowing down. We like you. You should meet people across the street. You should meet the digital team. So I met them on a Friday. I met I think I met Matthew Butler, Judith Crow, I think Mark Lazoff. I forget who else I met, but I met them on a Friday. And basically Monday, I was working on the integration team for Titanic, just tracking and doing layouts and stuff.
Wow. Okay. And you had never done anything like that, I'm assuming, right?
No. I mean, I had done 3D design in engineering school, but we were, designing, but the parts we were making were super simple, like make this widget and then test it for stress over, cycles, that kind of thing. But nothing very complicated, not like making freight ships or spaceships or, whatever.
That's cool. I was with Judith last week, actually, in New York.
Oh yeah. she's a wonderful person and I learned a lot from Judith.
Yeah.
Probably my best experience, I think, at DD, and probably a lot of people's best experience at DD was Fight Club.
Oh yeah.
That was a very small team, but Judith was, I think she was our CG supervisor.
Kevin Mack was a
VFX supervisor, maybe. Yeah. And then I think, Kevin was a VFX soup. I think Judith was the DFX soup.
Yeah.
Matthew was the CG soup. And then there was me, David Prescott, Dan Lemon, Zach Tucker, Vernon Wilbert, Mike Edlund. It's such a, I'm trying to think of who else was on there. I think Brad Parker. So there was just it was just like a really small, Kerry Villegas, Rachel Dunn. It was just like this really great group it was not huge, but, and I think Eileen Moran was our VFX producer.
Right.
So, I mean, it was just like, everybody kind of went off.
I think half that crew has gotten Oscar nominations by now.
Yeah, it was a pretty amazing little team, and Judith taught me so much, because she knew Houdini inside and out. She knew Prisms inside and out, and so I learned a lot of tricks from her for sure over the years. But that show especially. Yeah,
that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I find that fascinating. That those origin stories at DD, a lot of people have them that are very, very good to them for sure. So where did you end up going after DD?
Well, DD, yeah. So I'd probably worked there for 6 years, 7 years altogether. And after Day After Tomorrow, I was just sort of, I really wanted to get on set more. DD was one of those places where you would definitely get a lot of experience as a visual effects artist because you'd be on a show for 2 years or whatever it is, or a year and a half. But to be on set, you had to there was, a few people that were sort of in that role if you were a data wrangler or whatever. But if you wanted to do more as an effects artist or as a lead, it was a little harder to kind of carve out that time, say, well, I want to be on set. Like I visited set a bunch of times, but I wanted more of that experience. And when Asylum sort of came up as an opportunity, what I realized was that not only could I go there and do kind of like what I was doing already at DD, but also there was a chance to do more commercials without having to be in the commercial department or in the feature department. It was just sort of a little more fluid. Mm-hmm. And that was one of the main reasons I went there, was I just wanted to sort of shake it up a little bit and have a little more opportunity. And I love DD, and I love everything that I was able to sort of get out of working there and learn from people. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. But it was time to sort of try something else. And the crazy thing about Asylum was when I left, everybody was like, well, you're kind of crazy for going, like you're missing out on, you're not going to have Doug Roble and the amazing sort of software department of DD to kind of back you up anymore. And he was right. I didn't have anything like that. I didn't have Alan Kapler and, and all of his great tools, Voxel B, as you're saying, we didn't have that stuff. But what I did have was, a ragtag group of artists, very similar to some of those smaller teams that I had worked with at DD, like say the Fight Club team, people that could kind of do a few different things. And then it was just a chance to kind of succeed without as much behind me, without as big of a team. And it was a good kind of gut check, I think, for me to go, okay, well, I am able to still be successful with smaller teams or with a different team. It kind of builds your confidence that you don't have to sort of stay in the same place. You can actually try new things and move out. But also as the additional value of going there was that I ended up doing probably 50 commercials in 5 years or whatever, however long I was there. Right. So that was a lot of on-set rapid kind of on-set speed dating, where you're on set, you're thrown into crazy situations. You don't know what the show is. Sometimes you just go on set because they go on set on Saturday, go on set on Tuesday, and you go, okay, what are you guys trying to do? And you have to kind of figure it out. And then most of those teams already have their the on-set crews, those people already kind of worked with each other. They knew each other. You're always the outsider. So
Yep.
it honed my ability. I'm still learning, but definitely kind of got you. It was a bit trial by fire of like, you can either be the asshole on set that nobody wants to help, or you can be the guy that people want to actually help and to figure out how to actually get what you need,
Yeah, I was, when I was at Sway and at Method, it was kind of similar. I'd be like, yeah, go on set on Friday. And it's like, to what am I looking at? It's like, we're doing a TJ Maxx commercial or something, whatever it is. And it's like, we need to we're going to need to see some tracking here. It's like, okay. So you just want me to put up some markers and make sure everything's shot correctly?
Yeah. Like the director would be like, well, why do we need you here? We're not doing any VFX. And you're like, I think you guys are. Like, you hired our company. There's something we're going to be doing here. But
yeah. And so mostly it's just shoot a clean plate. We'll be good.
Exactly. But no, I mean, Method was very similar to Asylum.
Yeah, it was.
And Sway, I imagine, was similar as well. And it was sort of like that was like the mid 2000s was like the birth of the sort of boutique companies that were able to, they were, biting off decent size chunks of work out of, they're working on features, they're working on commercials.
Car commercials were huge at that time too.
Well, yeah, especially Sway. I know that was sort of like, that's probably where you really honed a lot of those skills is what I'm guessing, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it was all pretty much 90% car commercials, which you really get very good at that. But sometimes you're like, I'm just dying to do like some French toast or something, just a different kind of commercial.
Do a gooey creature or something.
Yeah. But yeah, no, it was a good thing. But Asylum had a reputation of having some of the best sort of flame artist kind of centric pipeline and idea, right?
Yeah, and that's a really good point. And it was another thing that kind of was eye opening for me. It was because, and I love the nuke department because we had Dee had nuke compositors and it had flame artists, and there were superstars in both of those groups. I mentioned Carey; he was in Klaus Henke. I mean, these guys could do anything. But then, and the nuke compositors were awesome too, and it was great to kind of have that back and forth. But what I found when I went to Asylum is because they were smaller, those flame artists there could sort of, I don't know, it seemed like they were able to somehow take, a version 1 or version 2 element from a team and either mix it with something that they found or whatever, and get a little more mileage out of it, more than I was expecting. And that was like a big sort of trick, I think, or big key in how Asylum was able to sort of do as much work as they were doing with not as big of a CG department, because they were putting more weight on make it work, somehow make it work. And it was sort of like, treating the CG elements almost as, photographed elements that were found that might not have been exactly perfect, but how do we make them work for the scene we're trying to do? And, sometimes that worked great and it saved us time. And other times we had to dig in and do another version because it just wasn't right. But there was more of a sort of flame centric attitude there, where it's like if they say it works, it's fine. Like we don't need to keep doing more elements for stuff. Which and from an artist perspective, for me, like I learned a lot about the job of actually working with, because I had been like a CG supervisor at DD when I left, but then I was sort of slowly kind of moving into more of a VFX supervisor role, which I had to kind of be careful about, because you can't just jump in there and be like, I know, because I didn't know everything. I still don't know everything. And to walk in there and be pointing at a flame artist screen and saying, do this, do this, do this, you just can't do that. Like it has to be you have to kind of, ease into those sorts of notes. And I learned a lot by listening and sort of seeing where their heads were at and what their process was. And I think that helped me a lot in kind of moving into those spaces and being able to VFX supervise on commercials and VFX supervise on some feature stuff even at Asylum. But it was only because I was able to really work with the flame artists that were really putting the shots together at the end of the day,
Yeah.
and 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 be open to everything that they were saying, and not just come in as like, well, I'm supervising, that never would have worked, and it's not my style anyway. But I did learn a lot, and that's what allowed me to kind of, when I went to Method, was like the same thing. It was like, but a lot of times flame artists, because they were used to being the sort of leads on commercials, there was sometimes a little like, okay, who's this guy, and
Right.
I still ran into that, but and we always are going to run into those sorts of situations, but the work at Asylum gave me the confidence to know that what I was asking for, even if I didn't know flame, I knew what the end image should have looked like, and
Right.
and I kind of get it by working with everybody.
My wife's a flame artist, so I'm always going to defend flame artists. Uh, but I do think, there was a thing about flame artists being, I remember specifically in DD, flame artists are like, they're so expensive and they got, their bays are huge and they think they're God. And that was sort of one of the things I used to hear about flame artists. And then having worked with them, at Method, actually, I was like, yeah, they deserve everything they get, because they are. Well, first of all, they're in a room with a client breathing down their neck as they're working, which is
Like
hard,
performance art or something.
right?
Yeah.
And so a flame bay is no joke, and especially places like Method where they, bring in catered food and the clients are, famous or whatever, and they're looking at your stuff and you have to perform for them. It's like, here, I'm going to fix this stuff. But I remember more specifically, I was doing yet another car commercial at Method, and the director, and we were delivering that day. I mean, almost like within an hour, right? We were going to deliver, and the director was there, and he looks at a shot and goes, the reflection on this car, it doesn't look quite right. Is it possible to move it? And I was like, oh, it's like, yes, it'll take me, like 2 minutes to move the light, but I got to re-render everything. And I'm just going to have to rush the farm and see what we can do. And so I had said, okay, I'll go ahead and put it on the farm, but and then the flame artist looked at me and said, okay, you do that. I'll see what I can do on the flame. And by the time I came back down, like 10 minutes later, and I was like, it's on the farm. We'll see what happens. And he's like, I fixed it. And he changed the reflection of a car. I mean, it was no small feat. I mean, it was just like,
Wow.
It was pretty amazing. So I was like, okay, so, deserve it. Well, everything, you just solved this huge thing, and they do that all the time. Right. So, cause they're used to that. They're used to, like you said, we're just going to work with what we got.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. And that's the thing, like I was of the mentality coming from DD of like, okay, we got to fix this. We got to fix it. Go back and, churn it through the machine. And again, back then in the early 2000s, Digital Domain hadn't quite sort of transitioned into more of a sort of lean and mean, like almost a commercial pipeline on, I think they were separate worlds. And, and while we knew there were certain aspects of the commercial pipeline that were definitely more efficient, there was definitely like the structure of the teams at the time, because it was hard to get artists, enough artists that were all really high level. You'd have like a certain amount of artists that are high level, and then you'd kind of fill the team out with mid-level and juniors. And as it turned out, a lot of those couple of high level artists would end up doing most of that work, because they'd be fixing scenes or whatever. But you still would, like, if something wasn't working, it would just sort of go back through the pachinko kind of thing and get re-rendered and then delivered again. And it was like, so there wasn't that, like, that quick sort of efficient, hey, I can fix this. Let's look at what the problem really is.
Right.
Not that it's a factory, but it's actually like, what's not working about the shot? Okay.
Right.
Can you fix it? Yes, we can fix it. Okay, great. Done.
Right. Well, it was like, and this was true when I was at Sony as well. It was much more of a pipeline. It goes down the pipe. If something has to be fixed, you got to go back to where it was broken and do it all over again. Right. And so you couldn't just like, I'll take it from here attitude.
Yeah. But I mean, I think, most vendors have sort of streamlined those processes. Sure. There are still some times when you're on a call with your vendor and you're like, well, can't you guys just, quick tweak that in the comp? And they go, no, we have to re-render it. I'm like, well, how long is that going to take? And you realize like, so they're, but so sometimes they know a lot more than I do as far as what's really going into making that shot look the way it looks, and you have to respect that too, but
for sure.
It's easy to simplify it. It's easy to simplify it when you're, looking at something through Zoom and you go and you don't realize just how many artists are actually putting this stuff together. It's not the same.
You're not in a screening room with like 100 people behind you looking at the shot.
Well, that's it. Like, I think, the days of like, when you used to sit in the screening room and you're looking and you have most of your team or all your leads or whatever are around there, everyone's around each other and we're all talking about the shot. It's very clear. Like there's a lot of people that are working to make this shot work. Right. And then when you're reviewing stuff on CineSync and you've got like the supervisor and the anim supervisor and the comp soup and a couple coordinators, you don't see the whole team, which is it's kind of a shame because you want to actually talk to everyone on the show. And that's why even though I don't get to do it as much anymore, I do like going to visit the vendors and meeting the artists and even looking at shots with everybody and it's so important, but it's less and less these days, and it's a shame,
Yeah, for sure. All right, so you went to Asylum for a little bit, and then I think Asylum closed. Is that correct? Is that what?
It closed about maybe a year and a half after I left. Like I left in 2009 at the end of Terminator Salvation, and I went to Method.
Right.
Mainly to work with again with Gabby Guerrier, who would like run the commercial department at Asylum, and then she had moved probably a year before I did to Method, and it just seemed like another good place to go. And there was an opportunity to supervise A Nightmare on Elm Street, and it was, I think at the time at Asylum I was ready. I'd been there for 5.5 years, and they had been really great to me. It was a really good experience. I learned a lot. But Method, it was a chance to like work and as like the supervisor and go on set, and again it was a cool subject matter. The movie was fine. It was actually I'm happy with how it turned out. I wish it was better received. I would say it didn't break the box office or anything, but it was a good experience. And I left to go to Method. And I worked there for about 3.5 years. And very similar to Asylum in that I was sort of doing multiple things. I was like working on commercials, working on features, developing stuff, developing commercial stuff, working, so there were times when I was working on like 8 different things at the same time, and my head was on a swivel. So I'd probably come by and see you and be like, hey, and I just do it like stream of consciousness. I would just like walk through the halls of Method, which was sort of like a cheese maze. It was just sort of like random desks everywhere.
Yep.
And you just sort of, you go up the stairs and you go into, into this CG pocket and like, oh, there's Chris. I go, hey, Chris, how's it going? I'd have to remember like what commercial are we working on right now, and like I got this, and this is done, and this is looking cool, and it looks great. And then I turn around and I go to the next desk, and it's a totally different show, and it's a flame art or maybe a nuke artist working on something. Yep. And you just those are my days.
Right.
3 years, just like a pinball, just bouncing from artist to artist. And
I remember you and Janelle came over around the same time too, right?
Yeah. Well, Janelle was there. She was our comp soup on Nightmare on Elm Street, and she brought a bunch of good nuke artists from DD from her Benjamin Button days, I think. And so that was kind of it was a good sort of infusion of strong nuke artists, comp artists at Method. And we worked together on that show. I don't think we worked together on anything else after that, but
it's cool. I just finished doing an episode with her because she just finished. She was supervisor on John Wick 4.
Yeah. No, Janelle's great. I run into her once in a while. I think I last saw her at the Bake Off actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, and it was one of those things where Method was a good company in 2009, and they had just merged with Riot, and so there was a lot of weirdness there where like the Riot artists were sort of not necessarily trusting of the method, and the method was not trusting of the riot. And here I'm just sort of showing up as the new guy.
You came from none of them, so
like, who are you with? You know, and just, hey, I just want to do good work, and everybody was, you know, for the most part, everyone was pretty cool, and you could you know, make new friends and figure stuff out. But it was nice to have some sort of new blood infused, because it was not just me. I just mean, like, there were good artists that were hired during that time that I think challenged some of the sort of approaches to things. But there are some. I mean, Method has some insanely good artists that I got to work with.
I mean, Method had the reputation, you know, well, I joined Method before the merger, so it was much smaller. And talk about boutique, it was, as you remember, like you're saying, it was the time of the good boutique little stores, right? Yeah. And Asylum and Method and were way up there, especially on the high-end commercials. And people would like call for specific flame artists all the time, like big commercial houses, like we want to work with Alex Farish or whatever, you know? And so it was kind of like a big deal to be that. And so I remember that was like, it was a kind of a learning experience to me. It's not just this pipeline or whatever. But yeah, it was really kind of cool. All right. So after Method, what was your next tour of duty?
So after Method, I went to Pixomondo.
Oh, okay.
I worked. Yeah, my friend Joni Jacobson was managing there, and I had worked with her. She was a flame artist that I worked with way back at Asylum on Amityville Horror. She was one of our flame artists. So,
nice.
So we already had kind of a nice rapport. And then I think I ran into her at like a VES or something, and what are you doing? And I said, oh, you know, and she said, okay, well, we might need you. So it took about a year or so of like back and forth, but I ended up getting a job on A Good Day to Die Hard. So it was like Die Hard 5, I guess. And,
okay.
Anyway, but the cool thing about that one was that I went to Budapest for about 10 weeks to sort of help on set for that. I mean, I was not the supervisor, but I was the vendor representative. I was the vendor supervisor, and it was great. I got to be, you know, in the mix of some of the really challenging sequences.
Nice.
So that was cool. And Pixo was great. But Pixo was like, you know, Pixo was what I thought was going to be sort of like another Method, but what it turned into was like Method plus like this sort of experiential ride kind of world, which is cool. But because that, honestly, in 2013, that business saved the industry. Because in 2012, you know, if you remember, I mean, like the movies were sort of like, if you were not doing a Marvel movie or like a Star Wars or something, like if you weren't involved, maybe it wasn't even Star Wars back then, but if you weren't doing something that was like the big boys and girls VFX companies, you were kind of screwed. Like if you weren't on the good list, then and you were just like a little boutique place like Pixomondo, and the work was starting to kind of dry up, and there was no streaming really. That was not really a thing. So Tilo, rest his soul, he got all these great Chinese projects. And even though like,
that's right.
Yeah. And so I was working with like Wanda. I did 2 projects with those guys, and it was really challenging. I'm not going to say it was easy, but I got to be in China a lot, and I got to learn a lot about the culture, learned a lot of the language, although I've forgotten most of it now, unfortunately.
How long were you in China?
Well, I was probably there a combined like 6 months, probably. I mean, there was 2 projects, and you know, each one was like a few weeks here, and then go back for, you know, big chunks of time. But one was like this big ride film, and we went all through the Hubei province, 10 different locations. So that took like, I don't know, 6 weeks to kind of like go through all this stuff. And then, and then when I was done with that one, I did a like a promotional film for a Franco Dragon, like big, you know, he did like La Rev. So he was doing these big things in China. This one's called Splendor. It was called
the big ride film. Was it one where it's like you're flying through the landscapes?
Yeah, it was called Hubei in the Air. You know,
right? I remember that.
It was all CG, but it was all kind of like based on a lot of drone footage that we shot. We went and shot as much of this stuff as possible, and then through photogrammetry, we did like, we do like passes, and then we'd also do lots of photogrammetry passes that could then be processed, and it was used for sure. It wasn't like we just put all the footage in and it popped out. It wasn't that easy, but like we had to kind of go there and just basically capture as much information as possible over that time. So
I remember they because you guys rendered it in V-Ray, and I think you guys came to one of our SIGGRAPH V-Ray Days presentations and presented that whole thing. It was pretty amazing project.
Yeah. I was actually, I was on for more of the sort of pre and the shooting kind of thing, and the actual post, I think by the time they kind of figured out what the actual paths were, and they were starting to kind of render it, I think I was moved on to another show. So I did not finish that one, but yeah, it looked great for 2013, 2014 technology, not too bad,
That's awesome.
But yeah, so that kind of floated or saved Pixomondo, but it wasn't just us, because you would hear, oh yeah, Rhythm Rhythm Hughes, it's like, oh, they're doing a Fast and the Furious thing, or they're doing, but there was all these. It was like I think there was like a Chinese version that was like Fast and Furious. It was the same center in Wuhan,
Right.
Wuhan doesn't mean what it used to mean. Like now when you say Wuhan, you think, oh, that's where COVID started. But like it used to be the place where we worked for this project,
Right.
Anyway, that was a long time ago. But
yeah. Well, that's very, very interesting. So how long were you at Pixo?
About 3 years.
Okay.
And then my old boss from Asylum, from the features, our features executive producer, Kathy Chasen-Hay, who actually we worked together for about 2 months when I started at Pixomondo, because she was the producer on Die Hard, and then she left to go to Lionsgate back then. So then now fast forward 3 years, Power Rangers is coming up, and she's like, oh, Sean, maybe you'd want to work on that from the studio side. And I was like, that sounds amazing. I met Dean Israelite, the director, and I already had an agent. I had kind of started talking to an agent a few years before, and nothing quite worked out, but at least I had someone in the wings that I could speak to. And so he's still my agent. Jason is still my agent. So I basically reached out to him and said, what should I do? Because Pixo was like, you could do a loan out, you could do, and I'm like, and we just talked about it and realized that, going full bore, just doing it and working for the studio was the best path. And Pixo was so cool and understanding. I mean, I made sure they actually got work on the show. They got a nice chunk of work, which felt good to be able to sort of give them something to do. And they did a great job on it, and that's it. Yeah. So that was 2015. And I've kind of been working on the studio side since then.
Okay.
8 years.
And so when you're studio side, do you actually stay with the studio the whole time, or do you go from studio to studio?
It's been sort of jumping studio to studio. I mean, it's funny how you think, when I finished on Power Rangers, there was nothing else that Lionsgate had that was like, hey, jump on this. And I think I had a few months off, and then I met Mimi at Disney, and, to meet everybody on Mulan, which
interesting.
Which I gotta say, I think, I was thinking about the other day, like, I mean, I think I got very lucky to get that job.
Yeah.
Just based on, there's a lot of really great supervisors out there. But I think what helped me was the fact that I had spent so much time in China, that I actually had like a really good kind of connection to it. So you think like, oh, I'm stuck doing this ride film or whatever. And it was interesting, but it wasn't like doing like a Terminator movie or something. It was like,
sure,
it wasn't the sexiest thing in the world maybe, but the fact is that there was a purpose there. The purpose was that it taught me a lot about, the culture in China. Like I definitely had a good sense of what Chinese landscapes looked like and felt like. And when that was the brief from Mulan, it's like, well, we need to make, we're going to be shooting in New Zealand, but we need to kind of make it feel like it's in China. Like I felt very comfortable sort of in that space. And I think a lot of that was from those multiple trips out there. And again, so for Mulan, I had to go to China as well. I probably spent 2 months in China, maybe 2.5. So, and I was more comfortable there because I had done that before. So, but after Mulan, people, just the relationships between, I think some of the producers at Disney and at Marvel, I think it was I know it was Di Giorgiudi, who was my VFX producer on Mulan, had a lot of connections at Marvel because she had done a whole bunch of stuff there, and she mentioned me to people there, and that's how I sort of got my foot in the door to at least interview for Moon Knight.
Nice. Yeah. Well, cool. I mean, that's pretty amazing. So tell us a little bit about Moon Knight. Like, how was that?
Moon Knight was a pretty awesome experience. So we shot that in Budapest and also in Jordan.
Okay.
So we could not shoot in Cairo, which made it very challenging. The only thing we actually had in Cairo was Dan Akers, who was one of our additional VFX soups, had gone. I'm sure you probably know Dan, right? Mm-hmm. So Dan's great. So Dan had gone with our director on a tech scout to Cairo. So he was there for like 5 days or something, and he had his Canon 5D, and it was taking a shit ton of pictures.
Right.
I don't think any of us realized that we were never going to get to go back there. I think it was sort of like, hey, we're going here, check this area out, check this area out. At the time, we didn't even know where our end battle, the end sequence of episode 6 was even going to take place. We knew it was somewhere in Cairo, but we didn't know whether it was going to be around the Cairo Tower, which is more like the sort of modern area, or whether it was going to be, more in the sort of outskirts, like near the pyramids.
Right.
And so he took pictures in kind of both, but it wasn't really enough of either one really. But on his own, he's like, I'm going to just go down the Nile River and take a bunch of pictures along the Nile, which thankfully he did, because there's this whole sequence when they're going down the river in Moon Knight, which we shot on the Danube River. We shot array plates on the Danube from a Zodiac, which was insane, but it was like a stabilized head on a Zodiac.
Right.
Very cold, but we did it like at 4 a.m. or it was crazy. But then we were able to kind of cut in a lot of these really great sort of buildings that Dan had taken just stills of, that we were able to, that Crafty Apes was able to put them into these river plates. But again, like if you watch the show, you would not think that we never really went to Cairo, because there's a lot of stuff. We had a great set that was built by Stefania, our production designer. She made a pretty great, massive street area, but we had to extend it with buildings. And so she actually recommended buildings within Budapest that matched the kind of colonial Cairo style. Mm-hmm. So we scanned the crap out of those, textured all that stuff. And then she also recommended areas within a few different cities in Jordan. And we probably LiDAR scanned and textured maybe 50 buildings in Jordan. That Dan was also a big part of that. He was down there with that team.
Right.
And then we just kind of like, Weta did a fantastic job, and Image Engine did a fantastic job of sort of building those assets together based on, reference that we could find, and kind of recreating Cairo out of all that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of amazing if you think about it, right? Like when we were talking about it earlier about commercials, like you did a whole episodic show, and the amount of effects on it are like startling, right? Compared to what, we used to do.
Yeah, it was like 2,500 shots. And the thing is, I did that show thinking, oh, this one might be a little easier than Mulan, and I don't know why I thought that, but like Mulan was about 2,000, maybe 2,050 or something like that in terms of how many shots. And we had like a year of post on that one. And then Moon Knight was like about 6 months of post and 2,400 shots or whatever. And so we were working on those shots. We were working on those episodes while we were filming. So there was a lot more overlap, and it was crazy. But it was myself, John Haley, who was our another additional supervisor, and Dan Akers, and the three of us just took the 2,400 shots. We each took 800, and I took the frame store and Weta stuff, and they took the other. We had a lot of vendors, so they probably each had maybe four or five vendors,
Right.
and we worked together really well. And it was one of those things where I hadn't really done that before. Really had to kind of delegate work to another supervisor in that sense. So it was a little bit like, oh, am I still going to be okay doing it this way? Don't I need to see everything? And yes, I had to see everything because I still had to present everything to Victoria,
Mm-hmm.
and I had to sort of have some ownership of it, but I still had to, give them enough leeway to be able to get what they needed for the shots,
Sure.
which I did. And I could never have done all those shots in that amount of time if I actually did everything. There's no way. Those guys did a shit ton of work to make those to make those shots work, So
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I know that those are challenging, challenging things. What was it like
new normal.
working with vendors as opposed to working with artists directly the way you used to?
Yeah, it's sort of what I was alluding to before. It's like that when your only exposure to the artist stream is like through this little window on your laptop or on your monitor. It's just not the same. But you try to call out stuff so that they know that you're trying to be a part of the process. I mean, you don't want to trip them up by saying, well, tell me exactly how many, what is your frequency of your noise right now? Like, no, but you can speak the terminology a little bit. And I haven't really done anything too complicated in Houdini in a long time, but I still open it up once in a while and do basic stuff. But I can sort of speak in general terms. So if it's an effects thing, I like speaking directly to the artist or the effects lead, whoever's on the call. But it's not the same. It's not the same. And when you're dealing with animation supervisors or animators and like actually trying to sort of explain stuff, sometimes the Zoom interface is actually good because you can kind of push the camera away and actually just like say, I want it to be like bop, 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 whatever. Mm-hmm. And you can see what you look like to them and go, did I just explain it or did I just do something that's completely lame, And I go, if it looks good in the camera, you go, maybe it's going to work, and then they're recording them a lot of times. So, but I have had a couple of times where I've been like, I was just working on the last Voyage of the Demeter. I was helping that for like the last, 4 or 5 months. And I did have a few times where I was able to go into a vendor to personally work with an artist. And it was so weird. I hadn't done it in a while, but it feels so good to be able to sit next to an artist who's playing with something and be like, okay, try and move that a little bit up, move it down, make it darker, make it bright. Like all those little tweaks that we used to take for granted, like just, you don't have that anymore, So you just
got to wait for the next version, right?
And you have to put a little more trust in it. But I think that's also why I like to do like a paint over, I only do this if it feels like it's just not quite working. Like if I've already given the notes once or twice and it's not quite what I've asked for or isn't quite what the director is asking for, I'll do a paint over, show it to the director, say, you mean something like this, and then I'll give that to them. So then I know, okay, it's a little bit more, it's trying to kind of tighten that loop up a little bit, and that's really like, as far as working as an artist, that's what I do the most of now is just doing paint overs in Photoshop. I've gotten pretty good at that, I guess.
Yep, absolutely. I know. Eric Barba was very good at painting over in Photoshop. He says the only skill I have left.
yeah. It's sort of like pulling it out of your brain and putting it in there. It's like it's the quickest way to get it done.
Sure. And then, what's the most recent thing that you worked on?
So Demeter, I finished in April, which is, that's for Amblin, and it's Dracula on a boat. Oh, and nice. I was actually working with our old friend, Brad Parker, on that one.
Oh, so nice.
So he was the supervisor on it. He had another show that he had to kind of go to. So we ended up splitting the role for about those last 4 months or 5 months or something.
Okay.
And I worked with Mr. X, who's now NPC. I think that might have been their last. Maybe that's our last show as Mr. X. We called him Mr. X, but I think they're credited as NPC. But it was.
Oh, so they've been renamed to NPC now?
I think so.
They're just sort of rolled into it?
I believe so. Yeah, but they did a great job. They did all the creature work and everything. And but it was great to work with Brad again. We hadn't worked in a few years together. And so I finished that, and then I've been working on uh, a small Netflix show called Family Leave. It's like a Ed Helms, Jen Garner sort of
Mm.
Freaky Friday body swap kind of situation, which has been fun, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm looking at another project right now. So yeah, it's all
All
good.
right.
Yeah.
So you haven't been necessarily as affected by some of the strikes and some of the stuff going on right now.
I mean, I would say that, I mean, I definitely been affected by it in that the last 6 months, the last 8 months, it feels like the shows have been definitely hesitant to kind of like push straight on, go without any kind of hesitation. They're like, we're doing the show, blah, blah, blah. There's
Mhm.
been a lot of like, well, let's see what happens. Let's see what
Right.
happens. And I think there's definitely been like less projects even in the ether because of it, you know?
Right.
Um, but the show that Demeter was definitely not affected. That was fine. We were already in post on that one. And then
Right.
Family Leave is in post right now. Hopefully that's fine,
Okay.
but definitely there's been that sort of pressure and strain on, on the studios. I think when they're even thinking about crewing up a show, and they're just not doing it as much because they know, oh, well, this is just going to get held up anyway. Let's not waste money developing something that's just going to get canned.
Right.
So,
Right.
but I'm hopeful that something gets figured out, because, it's scary, because, the next few months with the potential DGA strike, the SAG strike, like, one after the other, it's really going to be pretty brutal.
Right.
And I've been hearing, vendors losing shows because the shows have shut down. So it's like the visual effects companies are definitely going to be feeling that as well, which, I'm hoping that there's enough work to kind of keep them fed for the next, say, 3 months until they can kind of figure stuff out.
Right.
But yeah, it's scary.
It is scary. I think it's interesting. I mean, I'm curious about your thoughts about the film industry in general. I think there's going to be some changes. I think that there's starting to see shifts in things, right? So I don't think we're going to see as much Marvel stuff as we used to. Obviously, there's been changes at Disney that are sort of focusing their interests a little more, as opposed to making tons and tons and tons of work.
Yeah.
And I think that there's going to be some interesting new kind of content out there, stuff like Everything Everywhere All at Once, or things like that. What are your thoughts on that and where the industry's going?
Yeah, I think there's definitely, unique films like Everything Everywhere All at Once have been, rewarded handsomely for thinking outside the box, right?
Right.
And that was not a big budget project.
Teeny.
Yeah, but I think there'll definitely be more, and it's a good thing, because Hollywood kind of got into a rut of like, if it's not a tried and true, marketable franchise, then we're not going to put any money behind it,
Right.
and that still is the case for a lot of this stuff. But I think that blindly following and just saying we're going to make a sequel to this and we're going to make another one of this, I think doesn't have the same guaranteed success, as it might have, say, 5 years ago, So now what I'm hoping is maybe Marvel will say, look, instead of doing, a sequel to X movie, whatever. I don't mean X-Man. I just mean like, instead of doing a sequel to some movie, I don't want to say anything, but like, instead of doing that movie, maybe which might cost $200 or $300 million, maybe Marvel will do a couple of small things. Maybe they'll do two $50 million movies that are totally out of the box, weird ways. Like, if you think about what Moon Knight was like a totally outside the box kind of superhero story.
Right.
And even She-Hulk, which I know She-Hulk, it was very expensive to make, and I think there were some shots that looked incredibly good in that series. I think if it was such a unique take on, it's like, okay, let's take a superhero and put him into like a sitcom situation. Like, only Marvel could do that. Maybe they overreached, maybe they didn't, I don't know. But like if you could sort of take that same kind of unique thinking and just don't spend as much money on it. You know, don't show as many shots, don't have as many VFX shots or whatever, and give the audience something new and fresh. I think that's what's coming. And I think they're definitely being more selective about what's going out, but I don't think I don't think that it's sort of in tandem with the fact that the box office is definitely coming back. Like, people want to see good movies and they want to spend money in the theaters. That was something that people were not sure was going to really happen 2 years ago.
I think that there's much more in theaters than I was expecting, right? And so suddenly very interesting things are happening. Things like Cocaine Bear,
yeah,
you know,
which is like awesome. Right?
Yeah, I mean, it's like that's
that movie twice.
Yeah, it's you know, and even that's on the cheaper side of things. But even Avatar, like I looked at Avatar, I was like, it's good. Like there's a spectacle to that just feels good, right?
Yeah. And
the same with Maverick, right? When Top Gun Maverick, man, that was like, that's amazing. Good.
And there is still room for the spectacle movies, but I think what the difference is that 5 years ago it was only spectacle movies. Like that was only it was only.
We only had basically Star Wars or Marvel, right? That's all it was.
Yeah.
And so now I think there's a little more variation, a little fresh ideas. And the idea of it needs to be a reboot or something of a known IP, like a Spider-Man or whatever, is not necessarily the case anymore, which I think is kind of cool. People wanted to go see a movie because it was called Cocaine Bear. I would want to see that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I want to see Meth Shark or whatever the next.
Yeah, it is, and I think that there's another film that I saw recently called The Creator that looks really, really interesting. And then Dune's coming out again, so that's really cool. So I think that there's definitely something interesting happening in Hollywood. I do want to touch on one thing because I ask everyone this near the end of the podcast, so you're just going to have to deal with it too. What do you think about where technology is going right now in terms of things, especially in the areas of AI? Obviously, since we were talking about the strike, there's been some people, especially on the writer side of things, that are trying to prevent or stop those methodologies from making their job, taking work away from them or just, doing something that wouldn't help them. What are your thoughts on AI tools and where they're going to go, and how does that fit into the visual effects world of things?
Yeah, good question. And I've been actually learning a lot. I got to give a shout out to Jason Shugart, because he's been teaching me a lot of stuff. But there is what I'm seeing is when I'm playing with it, it's sort of like Mid-Journey or any of these tools they feel like a Google search on steroids. Right. It's like, normally you would try to find an image or something to help you make a concept, and you go on Google search and I can't find it. It's not there. It's not there. It's not there.
Right.
But now you can like type anything, and it's like it might not be what you want, but there might be something in it that you're like, that's kind of cool. I'm going to steal that little piece, and then I'm going to try the prompt, change the prompt a little bit again. Oh, that's kind of cool. And you're still kind of like building something out of pieces.
Sure.
And sure, I think part of the problem is that people look at Mid-Journey and they go, hey, like, I can just type in, a buffalo on roller skates, and there's the image, and that's great. I love it. Done. But the truth is that like what it's missing is that the sort of refinement and the sort of the filmmaker or the art director having some say, because it might not be exactly what they wanted, but like it's very easy to hold up your phone and go, look, a buffalo on roller skates. Right. Yeah, that is objectively a buffalo on roller skates, but it's not the buffalo on roller skates that I had in my mind or that they had in their mind. So there is still, and sure, if we all just accepted version 5 or version 3 or version 2 or whatever it is of the Mid-Journey, I guess they only do 4 versions, but like you're only, if we just all accept that's our version of the concept, then I feel like we're in for a very boring future. Sure. I think but I think the mistake is people go, oh, well, that's it. That you don't need a concept artist because, anyone with Mid-Journey can type in, buffalo on roller skates, and they get that image, and boom, that's what's going to be on the movie poster. And it's like, I just don't believe that it's going to ever be the version that comes out of the thing is going to be the version. You still need artists putting their heads together and trying to kind of like steer it. What I do think Midjourney and all these other tools are going to do is that they're going to accelerate the process. We're going to be able to do that a lot faster. We're going to be able to get the look that the filmmaker is looking for a lot faster. And there are certain tools that are going to get easier. So that just means that like people that might have been really good at roto or really good at paint work, they're going to get really good at using these tools that do their job for them, but you still need someone doing it. And now they're going to be able to do more of that. And maybe they want to get into, you know, fine art painting, or they want to get into matte painting, or they want to get into compositing, or, you know, something else that is sort of whatever the next thing with that's on their sort of hit list of tasks within the VFX world, you know? So I don't think that there's a magic button that's going to just like, unless we're just looking to accept the first version we get.
Right.
And I just don't think that's going to be the case. I think that there's always going to be a need to kind of adjust and make better.
Do you think from the studio side, producer side of things, they think that, oh, we're going to save a ton of money using AI instead of getting artists?
I think that from the studio side, like some of the filmmakers think that they're just going to get replaced by everything, like that they're not going to need directors anymore. Like when you talk to some of these guys, but I don't think that's really the case. I think that the money is just going to be spent on different stuff. Like the money is going to be spent on the artists that are doing the cleanup for you. Someone still has to run this stuff. It might be a smaller team, right? You know, like if you're using Nuke to do clean plating, and that takes you, I don't know, takes you 4 days to clean up, you know, a couple of shots or whatever it ends up being. Now they're doing the cleanup in a day, right, or something, because they're still like, so it's faster by a lot, but there still needs to be some technician, I think, running it to put it together. And I just don't know if there's ever a time. And I've seen some really cool stuff like the Wonder.
Oh yeah.
Where it's like, you know, I don't know how like automatic it is, but it's like you literally have a guy running down the street and then that guy becomes a robot, and it's like, you know, but there's still a lot of cleanup to be done. That'll all get better, I imagine. But you know, the intricacies of how that robot is moving, how it's looking, like you still need someone to get in there and make adjustments, unless you're willing to just accept the first version that comes out, you know? So I don't know. It may be a more optimistic view of it than a lot of people have, but I think that I see it as a way to sort of simplify our lives a little bit. Like if I'm not having to spend, because, you know, for me, if I've been on set all day, but I need to kind of do a quick concept of something, if I have to spend 3 hours searching Google to try to find something that I can generate in a half an hour on Midjourney and then just sort of, you know, cut it out and stick it into my Photoshop, that saves me time and allows me to kind of do more things. Right. So I'm hoping it's sort of that on a, you know, if you expand that into everybody, every artist, that means that, you know, an artist who's doing effects work, if there's an AI driven explosion tool or something, that it allows them to kind of make a really cool explosion, but now they can actually build SOP networks or whatever with AI, or I don't know. And then but then they're still tweaking it. They're still like, maybe what AI does is it gives you like a really cool, you know, operator tree that has controls. And now you're going in and you're tweaking stuff.
Well, I remember actually specifically, believe it or not, you mentioned him earlier in the podcast, talking to Doug Roble about this long time ago, before all of this controversy and everything that was going on. But he was excited about AI because of the speed that it could do things, right? So he was specifically talking about, at that time, fluid sims. It's like machine learning can massively accelerate fluid sims because it can figure out what it needs to be based on what it, you know, you start with this, it has enough information to finish the whole fluid sim in real time, right? And so, as opposed to actually calculating the real viscosity in you know, physical part of it. So, and so it's kind of one of those things. I think it's going to be very, very interesting to see where those tools happen and what they do along the line.
Totally. And, you know, and for years, I don't know, probably at least the last 10 to 15 years, we've called it machine learning. We didn't call it artificial intelligence.
Right.
You know, so I was like, it was like, oh yeah, we can use some machine learning to do the edge detection, or machine learning to do the interpolated frames, or machine learning to do the face replacements. Like that was, a couple years ago, and now it's like, and now it's artificial intelligence. It's pretty much the same technology. It's just
just give it a different name. But I think it's also like I think that the public, the media has taken on the term artificial intelligence because that's the scary thing, right? Yeah, machine learning doesn't sound scary.
No, because it's a machine, and you think a machine, it's dumb. It's just learning. Okay. But
general artificial intelligence is going to be the one that everyone needs to be scared.
The AGI stuff is scary. Yeah. Again, I've been turned on to some of these podcasts and listening, and it is scary, that the guardrails are not really in place yet. And that they're saying we need more physicists to jump into the, to get out of the stuff they're doing right now and to get into this world, and I wish I was smart enough to help, but I have no idea how to align an AI,
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Well, I think there's going to be a bright future. Somehow we'll get through this. We'll get through the writer's strike, and the AI will actually be there to help us the whole time.
Yeah. No, I think it's sort of like, imagine it's kind of like when you're supervising something and you ask the vendor to do X, Y, and Z, and it comes back because it's really like crowdsourced creativity, right? You've asked them to do something, and they come back and you go, wow, I didn't think of that. That's really cool. I love it. Or I like this part of it. Let's keep going with it. Like, rarely is it just, give me A, give me B, and that's what we take. It's like, so the fact that you have artificial intelligence means I think that we're going to end up with a lot more unique, interesting creatures, interesting, buildings, whatever, as long as we are keeping an eye on the fact that we're not just picking the first version that comes out, because the first version that comes out is going to be derivative of something that
by definition of what it does. I mean, that's the whole thing. It's giving you the most predictable result because that's what it's designed to do. Right. Yeah. At the same time, I think, what's interesting to me is, like you were saying, we're seeing some very unique things with AI, and it's not the AI that's interesting. It's whatever the hell is in people's heads that they haven't been able to do until now. Like, no one is drawing a buffalo on roller skates, right? Yeah. But you had that in your head, and you somehow like, no, let's see that as an image.
Oh, I know. My friend did. He's like, he imagined Star Wars as cave paintings, and it's just like, who the hell thinks of that? But it was cool. It was like, neat.
Yeah, my friend Eric. I don't know if you know Eric Sheely or not, but he was a pretty unique guy. But he's he's been trying to create the story about his past living in Greenwich, Connecticut in the 1970s. And so he's creating images of 1970s Connecticut mansions and, garden parties with Midjourney, sort of basically recreating his memories of his past and try to turn that into some kind of a story that's just kind of really amazing and unique. So really, really cool to see that use case too, like, all right.
No, that's amazing. Yeah, I actually met the filmmakers, Caleb and Shelby, I forget their last names, Ward maybe.
Okay.
Who are doing those Wes Anderson, if Wes Anderson was to direct, say, an Avatar trailer or Lord of the Rings.
Yep.
Or, Star Wars. And like they're doing it all with.
They did a Lord of the Rings one too.
Yeah. And great creative young people that they're using After Effects, they're using Houdini, they're using Midjourney, they're using tools like, and they didn't just press a button and say make this thing.
No.
Go to 7-Eleven and come back and then post it on YouTube. Like, there is art going on there, and yes, they're using ChatGPT to write an interesting script, but they're still adjusting it. They're still making, so again, that's sort of a perfect example of like, okay, these are artistic people who are now getting a chance to actually express themselves, not someone who, has no artistic basis at all. Obviously, they've got great ideas and they're doing fun things, and so there's that whole other level, is that it's going to allow more people to kind of be able to express their abilities, which is cool. I mean, there's going to be people that you didn't realize had all this great talent that are going to like coming out of the woodwork of like, I'm really good at doing this kind of concept work, and they're using Midjourney, but they're just really good at it.
Right. Yep. Indeed. In fact, we were just discussing that the best AI art that I've seen have come from people who are artists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, knowing what references to make.
Yeah.
What design language to use.
Right.
Knowing photography and knowing sort of what lens or what camera or what film or what,
sure,
depth of field,
Yep. Indeed.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Listen, thank you so much, Sean. I really appreciate you doing this with me and going on this journey and telling us all about the incredible journey that you've gone through in your career. And it's really amazing to see this. So excited to see all your new projects coming out. So we'll check out the Netflix show when it comes out.
Yeah.
What's it called again?
Netflix show is called Family Leave. Family Leave. But in the last Voyage of the Demeter comes out August 11th. That one actually has a release date.
Oh, okay.
So that one will be pretty cool. Cool. They're both gonna be fun, but like I'm excited for Demeter, because that one actually is like, we know when that's coming out. So
awesome. Awesome.
But yeah, this has been really fun, Chris. I appreciate you thinking of me, and it was actually great to talk to you. So thank you.